So I wanted to start this morning by asking a question. Don't want verbal answers perhaps, but just to get you thinking. Have you ever done something for someone, something really generous or really kind for someone, and something that's a bit out of the usual, out of the ordinary, something that you just wanted to do on that one occasion, and then hoped like crazy that they wouldn't tell anyone about it because you didn't want to get a reputation for doing that for everyone, that you knew if you did that kind of thing for everyone, life would be tough. Has anyone ever done that? Some other people don't want to raise their hand because they might get asked what it was and someone might want you to do it for them. There are things that people that you might have done. For instance, you might have given someone some information about a job opportunity and you then realise that there's someone else that might want that same job opportunity. If you give them the same information, the person you first told wouldn't have the same opportunity. Might be that you gave someone some money. You might have seen someone in serious need and you gave them not just a little bit of money, but what for you was a significant amount of money, and you realised that if other people come and ask you for that same amount of money, or if you started giving that amount of money away all the time, you'd have no money. Things like this, they happen and people do them, and I hope you do them and perhaps have that feeling, because the reality is there are times that we are prompted by God to do something for someone, but if we did that thing for people all the time, we'd find ourselves actually seriously depleted and seriously unable to do it. Giving money away to everybody is a wonderful thing, but then if you end up with not enough money to be able to put food on your own table, that's a terrible thing. Helping people with their problems is fine, but at the end of the day, when you go home and go to bed at night, you still have your problems. So if you're helping everybody else with their problems, you'll never get any help with your own. But we give brain surgeons who perform life-saving surgery days off. I mean, what a novel idea that we give a brain surgeon, someone whose life is dedicated to helping other people, we give them days off, right? And we all think that's okay, don't we? And it is. It's totally okay to give someone like that a day off. The most common one I find in our culture at the moment is this one. Yes, it's my ute. No, I won't help you move. I don't know if you've experienced this, but friends who have utes always get asked to help other people move house, and eventually they get sick of being asked to help people move house because they'd like to go home at some stage. I don't know if this happened to you. It certainly happened with friends of mine about 10 years ago. They just got sick of helping people move houses.
It works with sewing machines as well.
Works with sewing machines. People ask you to sew something for them. You're like, I'd like to sew something for me, or my kids sometimes. Yep. You can do things for other people, and so we want to, so we should do things for other people. But in the end, at some point, we also have to take some time for ourselves, especially if we're always doing something for someone else, but it's not actually what we're best at. You know, it could be something that we're good at, but we actually, when we think about how we want to spend our time and how we want to spend our life, and especially how we want to help other people, you go, well, I can help people doing that, but I'm better at helping people do this. So it might be that you're really good at helping people by listening to their problems, but you're much better off. You might be really skilled with finances and be able to help them budget their money better. It might be that you're good at helping people budget money, or you might be good at giving money away, but you're much better off putting someone on a pathway to a better life. But what you'll find in life is you'll be asked to help people with something, and you'd rather help them with something else. I say this because of the scripture reading for today exposes for us something really interesting about Jesus and his life with us. And Jesus' interaction with us as Christians today, and Jesus' interaction with people 2,000 years ago. Our text today talks about Jesus and this leper who needed healing. And part of the problem for me with this text is that Jesus, in this text, heals a lot of people. And if you go back 2 weeks ago, Sean talked about a text where Jesus also healed a lot of people. which is great, unless you're someone who still needs healing today. If you're someone who would like Jesus to heal you today, and Jesus isn't healing you like you hoped, what do you do with the fact that Jesus healed a lot of people? We all know people, if we don't need healing ourselves, we all know people who it would be great if Jesus healed them. What happens in this story, and also as a result of the two scripture readings from Luke's Gospel, these all follow in a row, is what happens is quite amazing and has some huge implications for us as Christians today. So I first want to give you a little bit of context. So 2 weeks ago I said that Sean preached, and on this text where Jesus healed a lot of people, first Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law, and then Jesus heals all these other people, but then Jesus goes away and prays and resets and thinks about what his life is about here on earth and all that sort of thing. And when people come to him wanting him to heal some more, Jesus says, no, I'm going somewhere else to bring the good news somewhere else. They find him, he didn't want to be found, they want him to stay, but he says, no, I'm going to go. It's interesting that people want Jesus to do one thing, something that he's very good at. He's very good at healing. I don't think anyone can say that Jesus is bad at it. He's good at healing. They want him to do more healing, but Jesus says, no, I'm going to go somewhere else and I'm going to go do something else. And so, of course, we hear that Jesus eventually gets Peter. Peter becomes a disciple, and Jesus starts to collect this little band, this little community of disciples. And we get from last week that what Jesus was really trying to do was to create a disciple and disciples. He wanted to call Peter. So Jesus, while he was doing healing in front of Peter, was really after Peter. People wanted him to do something, but Jesus was really interested in something else. And then we hear today's text. And it starts like this. While Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. Now, there's something actually quite amazing about this little sentence, this little phrase, which we don't actually think about very much because we're so far removed from that culture, is that this man has leprosy and he's in a town. Those two things actually don't go together. This man with leprosy doesn't belong in a town. He's an outsider. He's an outcast. He's not allowed in the community. There is something so wrong with him. He's so much of an outsider that he's not allowed there. If he's in a town, he's bringing disease to the town. If he gets seen in the town, people are going to yell and scream at him and tell him to get out. They're possibly going to even ask him, as they're yelling at him to get out, they're possibly going to put him at the end of a pitchfork or whatever tool that they can get hold of and force this man with leprosy out of town. He does not belong in town. And as they're forcing him out, just imagine if you're the leper, as they're forcing him out, they're going to ask him, what have you touched? What have you been in contact with? Because anything that this man has touched, been in contact with, is either going to get washed, buried, or burned. This man is an outsider of all outsiders, and he does not belong in town. He does not belong with the group. He is not allowed there. And so he's probably seeking Jesus in secret. He's probably not been seen by anyone but Jesus and his disciples at this point. And it begs the question, what must life be like if you're seeking God but excluded from God's community? What must life be like if you're trying to get close to God but God's people won't let you be close to them? And it begs the question of us. Who is excluded from Christian community today? In the regular church, in the regular Australian church perhaps. in the regular church that you go to, whether it be here or somewhere else? Who's excluded? And how do you think Jesus would respond to that? Who are lepers? Who are the lepers that we have in the church today? This is part of what we need to think about. Who's excluded? So first of all, maybe smokers. That doesn't come up as well as what I hope, but there's a smoker there. Smokers are lepers in today's culture in Australia. We exclude them. If they want to smoke, they can go outside. And fair enough that we need to protect everybody else, but the way that they get treated. Aboriginal people. How many churches do you go to that have both, for want of a better term, Anglo-Australians and Aboriginal Australians? How often are they excluded? Poor people. Lots of churches, middle class, or trying to be middle class, and people who are struggling financially end up on the outside. They get looked at differently. They can tell by the way people look at them. People who have doubts and are open about their doubts. People who are struggling with their faith, struggling to agree with who Jesus is. One of the great problems with Christianity in Australia is that people feel like unless they already believe, they can't be part of the church. Unless they're already part of the church, they can't become part of the church. The amount of people who ask me, what do I have to do to be allowed to come to church? I don't really agree. I don't really believe what you believe. I feel like an outsider. Can I come? People of different faiths and different cultures, are they allowed to come and be part of this and discover who Jesus is? Or do they need to discover who Jesus is before they're allowed to be part of the community? Do they have to believe in Jesus before they can be part of Jesus' community, before they are here? People with disabilities. We look at them and go, oh, you're different. They don't feel like they're welcome very often. Here's the last one, the controversial one. The LGBTQI community, who want to get to know Jesus, but the community of Jesus exclude them. Us, even. Do we ever feel like this? Do we ever feel like we're on the outside and trying to get close to Jesus, but the community of Jesus puts us on the outside? One of the saddest things I encounter as a pastor, and I encounter it over and over and over again, and it breaks my heart, and this is why I tell people about our church, is people who want to know God, but God's people exclude them. They say, I'd like to get to know Jesus. Can you tell me more about faith? And unless they live close to our church, if they live close to our church, I say they should try our church, but there's so many people who just live so far away from our church, and I'll meet them at different things, and they go, you know, I'm interested in Jesus. Because, of course, who I am and what I do comes up in conversation as you get to know someone. They go, I'm interested in Jesus, but I tried my local church and they wouldn't let me come. Or they said I had to change. Or they thought I had a sin that I needed to repent of. Before I was allowed in community, before I was allowed to discover and be with the Christians, I had to agree with the Christians and I had to change first. Well, they say things like, you know, I'm disabled, I need an access ramp, and the church is near me, I've tried 4 of them, none of them have an access ramp. Or they say, oh, I popped out for a smoke once, and I was singled out for being a rebellious person and a backslider. Back to the text. This man, he's there in town, and he says to Jesus, Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean. falls with his face to the ground and begs, Lord, if you're willing. What desperation this man has. And what recognition that he needs to be made clean, but it's Jesus who can do it. And Jesus reaches out and touches him. And when Jesus reaches out and touches him, he's not afraid of what the man has coming into him. He's not afraid of what might happen to him. He's instead reaching out to bless and make a difference for that man. And so I thought I'd just put this on. I hope you know this song. You know the words? Yeah. Reach out, touch someone. I can't even remember the name of the band, even though I just put it on. It always works, that's right. It always works. Touch. So if you don't know this song, you should know this song. And you should have it as a life motto, because I think Jesus had it as a life motto. I think this was a big thing for Jesus. I think they got the idea from Jesus and this is the colour anyway. Sorry, just had to indulge for a little bit. It's a great song. Here's the thing about what's going on. The lepers were kept away from community, from God's community. In part because it was believed that they would be destroyed by the holiness of God and that they would infect the people, and therefore the people also would be then not able to be near God. That if there was something wrong with you, the belief was if there was something wrong with you, and the whole Levitical laws and then all these extra laws that the Pharisees and teachers of the law and the priests had on top, they were all designed because it was believed that if there was something wrong with you, you could not be in the presence of God. And Jesus says, no, if there's something wrong with you, I want to reach out and touch you and heal you. In the original manuscripts of Mark's Gospel, Mark, Matthew and Luke all record this. Mark actually says something really interesting, and this is Peter's account. So Peter is saying, who was there, that Jesus was indignant when he reached out to the man. Jesus was mad. Jesus was angry. Jesus was upset. And he's indignant. Why is he angry at this man? No. Then why is he angry? I think he's angry because this man was excluded. Because this man who wanted to be near God, or wanted to be near God's Son in Jesus, had to come to Jesus in secret, away from the community. And there are countless people in our world today who want to approach Jesus but have to do so in secret because of how they believe the community of God is going to respond. I think Jesus still gets angry. I think Jesus still gets angry that people are excluded from coming close to him, or that people have to come close to him in secret and can't do so with the community. That they have to find another way. And so if Jesus does that, how might a follower of Jesus respond? How might someone who's been asked by Jesus to follow Jesus and be like this, how might a follower of Jesus respond when they discover that a person created by Jesus has been excluded by Jesus' own community? What might Jesus expect of us when we discover someone's excluded? I think the most Jesus thing that we can do when we discover someone who's been excluded from Jesus' community and who wants to get close to God is to reach out and touch, to connect, to embrace. I think that's the most Jesus thing we can do. And when the church, when Christian people exclude, we're choosing not to follow Jesus. But when we include, we're following Jesus. And so then we read in the text that Jesus says, I'm willing, be clean, and the leprosy left him. Now that would be a cool end to a sermon, I would have thought. But Luke doesn't leave it there. There's some more implications for us. Mark and Matthew don't leave it there either. Because it's interesting what happens next in this text. It's really fascinating what happens when we look at what happened after Jesus healed him. And Jesus heals him, and Jesus says to this man, go and show yourself to the priest. Now, I was a bit stuck in my preparation for today's message when I looked at that, because I'm like, why does Jesus say go show yourself to the priest? And the theological answer is that Jesus was upholding the Old Testament law, and that Jesus was getting the man to do what the law required him to do, which is to go and show himself to the priest so that he could be officially declared healing. And Jesus is pro-Old Testament, or at least pro-Old Testament laws, and he obeys the law and fulfills the law, and that's all interesting, and that's great. I think Jesus had another reason. I think Jesus is saying, give me 3 weeks break. I think that's what's really is going on. That Jesus wants a break. Jesus wants a rest. Because if you think about it, if you look at the texts that have happened just before this, if you look at what's going on in Luke's Gospel, every time Jesus heals someone, crowds come and Jesus moves away. Every time Jesus heals someone, crowds come and they come for healing and Jesus moves away. And when Jesus says, go show yourself to the priest isn't just next door. The priest isn't in the local synagogue. The priest is actually in Jerusalem. And it takes a week to walk to Jerusalem. And so this man, Jesus said, don't tell anyone. Go show yourself to the priest and do the sacrifices. So it takes a week for this man to get to Jerusalem. He's probably going to connect with some people while he's there, spend another few days, and spend a week walking back. So Jesus is saying, give me 3 weeks before you tell anyone. I'm up to something here. I want you to go there and don't tell anyone before you leave. What happens instead? Yet the news spread. So the man doesn't do what Jesus asked him to do. And instead he goes and tells everyone. The man didn't do what he was asked to do. He goes and tells people, the news spread, and then what happens next? People come to find Jesus, and as a result, Jesus withdraws often to pray. Which means something really significant for you and me. It means that there were consequences for Jesus and his disciples. Remember we said before, Jesus came, and while he's doing the healing, his goal is to get Peter as a disciple and Peter's brother and his friends. Jesus is trying to make this little community of disciples. Yet instead what he gets is people coming to him wanting healing and to hear the message, hear the preaching. They've come for miracles and a show rather than to follow and be in community. They've come for miracles and a show rather than to follow and be in community. Because they come for miracles and a show, Jesus is saying, that's not what I'm here for. I'm going to have to go away and pray and reassess and talk to my Heavenly Father again about how exactly are we doing this mission that I came here to do. You see, crowds and shows are fine, but that's not what Jesus came for. Crowds and shows are fine, But it's not what Jesus came for. Jesus came to create his church and to make disciples. And because the man didn't do what he was asked to do, he can't do what he came to do. And so just like for us in our life, when people ask us to do what we didn't come to do, we have to find a way to do what God has asked us to do. Some more implications that I want to finish off with. When we think about our life with Jesus, and especially when we think about healing and miracles, Jesus uses healing and miracles, yes, to get our attention, to get our focus on him, not to attract a crowd who just want healing and miracles. What Jesus wants is for us to follow and to be in community with him. He wants us to follow and be in community. Following Jesus and being in community with his disciples is a bigger deal to Jesus than healing. And so Jesus would rather you pursue that than healing. I said before, if you've got a choice between one thing or another, this is one of those choices. If you've got a choice in your life between healing or being in community, miracles and following Jesus, pick following Jesus every time. That's what Jesus would have you choose. Hopefully, you can do both. But if you have to choose being a disciple. Second of all, it matters that you do what Jesus tells you to do. Here's what so often happens when I talk to people about the fact that God has asked them to do something, or they feel like God has nudged them in a particular direction, or they believe that God has asked them to, it might be God's asked you to do something really small that you think is not important, and you think it's just between you and God. What God asks you to do is never just between you and God. It's always affecting the community. It always affects others. When God asks you to do something, it's not just for the sake of your relationship and you can go, oh, well, if I disobey God, I know that I'm forgiven and it's okay. Yes, you're forgiven. Not quite no, it's okay. Yes, you're forgiven, but it affects other people. It affects the people around you. Even if it seems small, even if it seems unimportant, even if you're like, it's no big deal, I've been healed, why wouldn't I want to tell people? Jesus is saying, no, go do something else first because what I'm asking you to do is part of my plan. Jesus is strategic in what he asks us to do. He always serves a purpose. Last one, this is perhaps a bit frightening to think about and a bit scary and perhaps sounds like I might be having a go at some people, hopefully not, but it's true and we need to know this. When Christians make healing the thing about Jesus, Jesus gets pushed to the fringe of church and culture. When our focus becomes healing and not discipleship and community, Jesus gets pushed to the fringe, and that's what happens in this text. Because people come to Jesus for the wrong thing, Jesus has to reorient church to the right thing. He has to reorient people to the right thing. And we see this happen. I believe that some people are gifted with a healing ministry. But when they become, for want of a better term, travelling shows of healers, what ends up happening is that people put their trust in the travelling healer so often and look for the healing rather than the Christ who heals. If our faith in Jesus becomes dependent on whether or not Jesus gives us what we want and what we're asking for, We make healing the God. We put God on the outside. And we see this happen in our wider culture. Is that there are people who, because every time they hear about God, they only hear about healing and, just pray for that and you'll be healed of that, they end up rejecting the Christian faith on something other than Jesus. People say, how can God be real when there is suffering in the world? And that buys into this whole thing that if God is real, God heals everyone. And the God then becomes healing, because that becomes the stumbling block, is suffering and healing. When the stumbling block should be no one and nothing but Jesus. And so we introduce people to Jesus. And if Jesus heals, fantastic, great, and praise God. But if Jesus doesn't heal, they should still have Jesus, rather than losing everything if they're not healed. Besides, for all the miracles that we read in our New Testament, all but John of the apostles get killed for their faith. Following Jesus has a cost. Sickness, disease, suffering. They can all happen, but they are nothing compared to knowing Jesus. So here's what Jesus wants for you. More than he wants your healing. Here's what Jesus wants for your friends that you want to be. Jesus wants them to follow. And Jesus wants them to be part of his kingdom. Because in the end, we will all be healed in heaven. But not because of the power of healing, but because we will know Jesus. So we spend this life knowing Jesus. May you know that Jesus wants to be in relationship with you. That is the most powerful gift he can give you. And that you can live and walk every day with Jesus and his people. Let's pray. Father God, thank you for what happens in this recording by Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Thank you that this is a thing that happened that we can learn from. That we can see you then at work in our lives and in our church, in our community. And help us to spend our lives helping people get to know your Son, Jesus. By the way we speak, by the way we act, by the way we love. We pray this in Jesus' name.